Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Jake Morrison, and the voice of Emma Chen's mother breaking over the phone still echoes in my head like a prayer turned curse. Mrs. Chen had called the Olympic National Park Ranger Station at 11:47 p.m. on October 13, 2019, her Mandarin accent thick with tears as she begged me, specifically me, to continue searching for her daughter when every other ranger had written off the case as another runaway college kid. "Please, Ranger Morrison," she'd whispered, her voice cracking like autumn leaves. "Emma is good girl. She no run away. Something happened to her on that trail. You find her, yes? You bring my baby home?" I'd promised her I would. God help me, I'd promised. Now, standing at the Ho River trailhead at 5:23 a.m. with my Garmin GPS reading 47.8606 degree N, 123.9348 degree W, I adjusted my Kelty tactical pack and felt the familiar weight of my Motorola APX 7000 radio against my hip. The October air bit through my olive drab uniform, carrying the scent of decomposing cedar and something else. Something wrong that made my analytical mind catalog every detail, while my gut screamed warnings. Emma Chen, 22, University of Washington forestry student, had vanished on October 10th while conducting research on old-growth mycorrhizal networks along the Ho River Trail. Last seen at GPS coordinates 47.8644 dgen, 123. 9522 Kotu Outer W, wearing a red REI co-op rain jacket, blue jeans, and Merrell hiking boots. Her abandoned research equipment had been found scattered near mile marker 8.3, but no blood, no signs of struggle, no body. The other rangers, Thompson, Martinez, even Chief Williams, had already moved on to more pressing cases after 3 days of grid searches turned up nothing. But they didn't hear Mrs. Chen's voice. They didn't see the photo she texted me of Emma in her graduation cap, smiling with that bright future radiating from her eyes. I keyed my radio. Unit 23 to dispatch, beginning extended search pattern, Ho River Trail, mile 8 vicinity. Copy that, 23. You're flying solo out there. Weather service is calling for heavy rain by 1400 hours. 10-4 dispatch. The trail wound through cathedral-tall Sitka spruces, their bark dark with moisture. My boots, Danner Acadia 8-inch, resoled twice because the Park Service budget was shit, crunched on the thick carpet of fallen needles. The analytical part of my brain, the part my colleagues called overthinking, was already processing anomalies. No bird calls, no rustling of small mammals. Even the ever-present Olympic chipmunks had gone silent. Mile marker 8 appeared through the mist like a gravestone. I pulled out my field notebook, a weathered write-in-the-rain tactical pad, and began documenting everything the experienced rangers had missed. Broken fern fronds at ankle height, 23 degrees northeast of the trail. Bark scrapings on a Douglas fir, roughly 5 feet 8 inches high. And there, pressed into the soft earth beside a rotting nurse log, a partial boot print. Not Emma's Merrell pattern. This was different. Worn smooth, like someone had been walking on concrete for years. Homeless maybe, or someone living rough in the backcountry. My phone buzzed, a text from Mrs. Chen. "Any news? Please find my Emma. She all I have left after her father died." The guilt hit my stomach like a physical blow. I was the department's analyst, the guy who ran databases and calculated search probabilities and got laughed at when I suggested correlating missing persons reports with lunar cycles. I wasn't the hero who rappelled down cliffs or tracked through unmarked wilderness, but Emma's mother had asked for me specifically because that smart ranger with the kind eyes had been the only one to listen when she'd insisted something supernatural was wrong. The rain started as I reached mile 8.3, fat drops that turned the forest floor into a squelching mess. My outdoor research Gore-Tex jacket kept the moisture out, but couldn't stop the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. The wrongness here was palpable, like walking through a graveyard at midnight. That's when I heard it. "Help. Please." The voice was weak, male, coming from somewhere off-trail to the east. Every ranger protocol screamed at me to radio for backup, but the voice sounded so desperate, so human. Emma had been a compassionate person. Her mother had told me how she'd volunteer at homeless shelters, how she'd give her lunch money to panhandlers in Seattle. I pushed through the salmonberry undergrowth, following the sounds of distress. 50 yards off trail, I found him. He was huddled against a massive cedar, wearing clothes that might have been any color originally, but were now uniformly brown with filth and wear. Greasy hair hung in strings around a face that was gaunt with hunger, eyes sunken deep in dark sockets. One leg was bent at an unnatural angle, and dark stains covered his torn jacket. "Please," he gasped when he saw me. "Been here 3 days. Fell, think my legs broke. Just need help getting back to the trail." Every fiber of my being wanted to help. That's what rangers do, we help people in distress. But my analytical mind was screaming warnings. The man's injuries looked old, not 3 days fresh. The blood on his clothes was rust brown, not the bright red of recent trauma. And his eyes were wrong. Too bright, too aware, like something else was looking out through them. "What's your name?" I asked, keeping my distance while unclipping my radio. "Jimmy," he said quickly. "Jimmy Morrison. Been hiking alone, got turned around, fell down that ravine over there." He pointed with a shaking hand. "Please, I just need help. I'm so cold, so hungry." Morrison. He'd given my last name. Coincidence? Or had he been listening, watching, learning? "Jimmy, I'm going to call for medical assistance. Just stay put." "No." The word exploded from him with surprising force. Then he seemed to catch himself. "I mean, no need for all that fuss. Just help me up. Help me walk. I don't want to be any trouble." My thumb hovered over the radio call button. This was wrong. Everything about this situation violated every instinct I'd developed in 6 years of backcountry work. But what if I was wrong? What if this was just a confused, injured man who needed help? What if this was what had happened to Emma? "Did you see a young Asian woman out here? Red jacket, doing research?" Something flickered across Jimmy's face, too quick to catalog but unmistakably predatory. Yeah, I saw her. Pretty little thing. She helped me, gave me some of her food. Sweet girl." The way he said "sweet" made my skin crawl. "Where is she now?" "Don't know." She went on ahead, said she'd send help back for me. That was days ago. His voice took on a whining, manipulative tone. "Please, Ranger, I'm dying out here. Just help me get to the trail." I knew with absolute certainty that this man had taken Emma. Every analytical algorithm in my brain was screaming danger, but I had no proof, no evidence that would hold up in court or even convince my fellow rangers. Just intuition and a growing sense of supernatural dread. "Okay, Jimmy, I'll help you." I approached slowly, cataloging details. His clothes smelled like decay and something chemical, copper pennies and sulfur. As I got closer, I could see that his broken leg wasn't broken at all. The unnatural angle was just how he was positioned. And the blood on his jacket wasn't from injury. It was spatter, the kind you get when something violent happens close range. I knelt beside him, my hand on his shoulder to help him up, and felt muscles like steel cables beneath the filthy fabric. This man wasn't weak or injured. He was coiled spring, a predator waiting to strike. "Thank you," he whispered, and when he looked up at me, his eyes had changed. They were solid black now, not a hint of white or iris, just endless dark that seemed to pull at my vision like a whirlpool. Sweet, helpful Ranger, just like the girl. His hand shot out faster than anything human could move, fingers like iron clamps around my wrist. The skin contact sent electricity up my arm, but not normal static. This was cold fire, wrong energy that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "She screamed so beautifully when I showed her what I really am," he said, and his voice was different now, deeper, with harmonics that seemed to come from multiple throats. "Tried to run, but there's nowhere to run in these woods. nowhere to hide from what's been waiting here since 1987. My analytical mind latched onto that date even as terror flooded my system. What had happened in 1987? Jimmy stood up. No, he flowed upward like smoke-given form. The broken leg was perfectly fine. His grip on my wrist was cutting off circulation, and I could feel bones grinding together under the pressure. You want to know what happened to sweet Emma? His free hand reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made bile rise in my throat. A piece of red fabric, torn and stained dark. Emma's REI jacket. She's still alive, Jimmy continued, his black eyes reflecting no light. Still screaming. The ritual requires 3 days of terror before the final feeding. Today is day 4. The rational part of my mind tried to process this information. Ritual, feeding. This wasn't just a homeless man gone violent. This was something else wearing his skin. I yanked my emergency whistle to my lips and blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal distress signal. The sound echoed through the forest but was swallowed by an unnatural silence, as if the trees themselves were absorbing the noise. Jimmy laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with children crying. No one coming, Smart Ranger. No one left to come. The others who tried to help, Martinez found them yesterday, or what was left of them. Martinez. He'd been part of the search team. He'd radioed in yesterday morning, then gone silent. What are you? I whispered. What am I? Jimmy tilted his head at an impossible angle, vertebrae popping like bubble wrap. I'm Gratitude, Ranger. 32 years ago, a kind social worker tried to help a poor homeless man during a ritual gone wrong. She invited evil in with her compassion, and evil has been feeding ever since. A social worker. The pieces clicked together in my analytical mind. There had been reports, buried in old files, about ritualistic killings in the Olympic Peninsula, satanic panic stuff that the authorities had dismissed. But what if it wasn't panic? What if something had actually been summoned and never sent back? Jimmy's grip tightened, and I felt the bones in my wrist crack. The pain was exquisite, sharp enough to cut through the supernatural terror flooding my brain. I had to think, had to use the one advantage I had, my mind. The ritual, I gasped. You need willing victims. People who choose to help. Smart boy. Jimmy's grin revealed teeth that were too sharp, too many. Sweet Emma chose to help, just like you're choosing now. But I'm not, I said, and yanked the tactical knife from my belt with my free hand. I drove the blade into Jimmy's wrist, the one holding me. A normal person would have screamed, would have let go. Jimmy just laughed as black ichor spurted from the wound like crude oil. Iron and steel can't hurt what's not really flesh, he said. But I noticed he did release my wrist. I stumbled backward, my analytical mind racing. Not flesh. Demonic possession. The homeless man was dead, had been dead since 1987. Just a meat puppet for something else. But even demons had rules, had weaknesses. My phone had signal. 1 bar but enough. I speed dialed Mrs. Chen. Ranger Morrison, you find Emma? Mrs. Chen, I said, backing away as Jimmy advanced with impossible fluid movements. I need you to do exactly what I say. Are you religious? Do you have faith? Yes, I am Buddhist, but my mother was Catholic. Why? Pray for your daughter right now. Pray with everything you have, and keep praying until I call you back. I hung up and faced the thing that had been Jimmy. You feed on compassion turned to terror, but you can't touch faith. You can't corrupt a mother's love. The thing's black eyes narrowed. Clever little analyst. But faith is just another kind of fear, and fear feeds us just the same. It lunged at me with inhuman speed, but I was already moving, following a pattern my mind had calculated based on the terrain, the angle of attack, and 32 years of hunting behavior. I dove behind the massive cedar, using its bulk as a shield. The impact when Jimmy hit the tree shook the entire trunk. Bark exploded in all directions, and I heard something that might have been wood splintering or bones breaking. When I looked around the tree, Jimmy was embedded 3 inches deep in the solid cedar, black ichor leaking from every pore. Iron and steel might not work, I said, pulling out my emergency flare. But you're still using dead flesh. And dead flesh burns. I ignited the flare and jammed it into the thing's chest. The screaming that followed wasn't human. It was the sound of every nightmare, every childhood terror, every moment of absolute helplessness, condensed into acoustic form. The forest itself seemed to recoil from the noise. Birds exploded from trees in panic, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the howl of what might have been wolves. Jimmy's body convulsed, black smoke pouring from his mouth and nose. The flesh began to bubble and char, but underneath the decay I could see something else, something with too many teeth and eyes like burning coals. This vessel is finished, it rasped through Jimmy's melting throat. But there are others. So many others in these woods. So many lonely, hungry souls looking for help. The body collapsed into a puddle of organic soup, leaving only the stench of sulfur and burned meat. But I could feel it. The presence hadn't died, just moved on to find another host. My radio crackled to life. Unit 23, this is dispatch. We've got reports of screaming from your location. What's your status? Unit 23, I need immediate backup at coordinates 47.8644 degrees N, 123.9522 degrees W. Multiple hostiles. Missing person case is now a homicide investigation. Copy that, 23. Units are en route. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes. In the supernatural quiet that had fallen over the forest, that felt like 20 hours. But I had work to do. Emma was still alive. Day 4 of the ritual. I had to find her before sunset, before whatever feeding cycle this thing followed reached its conclusion. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Jake Morrison's situation? Comment below. Following the trail of disturbed vegetation and that wrongness that seemed to cling to everything the entity had touched, I found them. The other victims were arranged in a circle around a makeshift altar built from stacked stones and rotting timber. Martinez was there, or what was left of him. The thing had kept him alive for days, feeding on his terror. His ranger uniform was shredded, his radio smashed, his eyes were gone. Just hollow sockets that seemed to track my movement despite their emptiness. Jake? Martinez's voice was a whisper, barely audible. Is that you? It's so dark, I can't see. I'm here, Martinez. I'm going to get you out. No, he wheezed. Too late for me. But the girl, Emma, she's in the cave, behind the altar. Still alive, but not for long. It's waiting for sunset. That's when the feeding completes. The cave was a wound in the earth, invisible from any angle except straight on. The stench that poured from its mouth was indescribable. Death and decay, mixed with something chemical and wrong. My tactical flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing walls covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. Emma was there. She was alive, conscious, but changed. The terror had been building in her for 4 days, and it showed in every line of her face. But when she saw me, when she recognized the ranger uniform, hope flickered in her eyes. You came, she whispered. My mother. Did she? She's praying for you right now, I said, cutting through the ropes that bound her to a natural stone formation. She sent me to bring you home. As soon as the ropes parted, I felt it, the presence rushing back, looking for a new host. It had been using the cave as a base, but now that I'd disrupted its ritual site, it needed flesh again. Emma screamed as something invisible slammed into her body. Her back arched, and when she looked at me again, her eyes were solid black. Too late, smart ranger, she said in that multi-throated voice. This vessel is young, strong. This one will last decades. But I'd been thinking, analyzing, calculating. Mrs. Chen is still praying. A mother's love doesn't break because her daughter's body is violated. Faith doesn't end because evil touches what we protect. I pulled out my phone and hit speaker as Mrs. Chen's voice filled the cave, speaking in rapid Mandarin, prayers, pleadings, promises to every deity she'd ever known. The thing possessing Emma recoiled as if the words were physical blows. Faith isn't just hope, I continued, advancing on the possessed girl. It's certainty. Mrs. Chen knows her daughter's soul is pure. She knows love is stronger than evil, and she's not stopping until Emma comes home. The black eyes flickered, showing glimpses of brown underneath. Emma was fighting, using her mother's prayers as a lifeline back to herself. You can't hold what doesn't belong to you, I said, grabbing Emma's hands. And you can't corrupt what's already been blessed by unconditional love. The presence shrieked, not through Emma's throat but directly into my mind, a psychic assault that felt like ice picks through my temples. But Mrs. Chen's voice kept streaming from my phone, prayers in 3 languages now as she called in every favor, every spiritual connection she'd ever made. Emma's eyes cleared. The presence fled her body like smoke, dispersing into the shadows of the cave. "Mom?" Emma whispered. "She's here," I said, holding up the phone. "Emma? Emma, is that you? My baby, my precious girl?" The reunion was cut short by the sound of approaching helicopters, search and rescue finally arriving. As I helped Emma toward the cave entrance, she grabbed my arm. "It's not gone," she whispered. "I could feel it in my head. It's not gone, just waiting, looking for another host." I nodded. She was right. The entity was still out there, still hunting for compassionate souls to corrupt. But that was a problem for another day. Today, I'd kept my promise to Mrs. Chen. As the rescue helicopter lifted off, Emma reunited with her mother in the most emotional scene I'd ever witnessed. I realized something had changed in me. The other rangers weren't calling me overthinking Morrison anymore. They were listening when I suggested patterns, when I connected dots they couldn't see. Because sometimes being smart isn't about having all the answers. Sometimes it's about asking the right questions and trusting that love, human, divine, or maternal, is stronger than any evil that walks in the dark places of the world. My name is Jake Morrison, and I learned that night that intelligence without compassion is just data processing. But intelligence guided by love? That's how you fight monsters. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to the possessed vagrant. I read every single one. My name is Cole Harrison, and I saw Zoe Martinez for the last time 3 meters ahead of me on the trail before she simply disappeared. I need you to understand something right off the bat. I don't believe in ghosts, demons, or any of that supernatural bullshit. 23 years as a forest ranger in Olympic National Park, and I've seen every trick nature can pull. Lost hikers who swear they heard voices calling their names, altitude sickness and panic, campers who claim they saw glowing eyes in the darkness, tapetum lucidum reflection from nocturnal animals. Every unexplained phenomenon has a rational scientific explanation. That's what I told myself until October 13th, 2018, when reality decided to take a shit on everything I thought I knew about this world. The morning started normal enough. I was conducting my routine patrol of the Solduke River Trail at 800 hours, GPS coordinates 47.967 N, 123, 83 W, when my Motorola APX radio crackled to life. Unit 7, we've got a 22-year-old female solo hiker, overdue from a day hike on your sector, name's Zoe Martinez, last seen yesterday around 1500 hours near the Hot Springs Junction. Dispatch rattled off the standard details: height, weight, clothing description, but I wasn't really listening. Another city kid who bit off more than they could chew, probably nursing a twisted ankle somewhere, wondering why their iPhone had no signal bars. I'd found hundreds of these lost souls over the years. They all followed the same pattern. Start confident, ignore trail markers, get turned around when the Instagram photo opportunities dried up, panic when they realize the forest doesn't give a damn about their convenience. Zoe would be no different. I adjusted my pack weight, 47 pounds of search gear, water, first aid supplies, and set off toward the hot springs with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd done this dance too many times to count. The October air carried that particular Pacific Northwest bite that warned of the coming rain, and I could taste the metallic dampness on my tongue. My breath formed small clouds as I called out standard search protocols. "Zoe, Forest Service, call out if you can hear me." The sound echoed off the old-growth Douglas firs and died in the moss-covered silence. Normal, expected. Nothing to suggest that in 3 hours my understanding of the universe would be torn apart like wet tissue paper. I'd been tracking for 90 minutes when I found her boot print in the mud near Deer Lake. Size 7 Merrill hiking boot, consistent with the missing person report. The print was deep, indicating she'd been moving fast, maybe running. Panic response to being lost, I figured. Her trail led north toward the restricted area, the section of park that had been closed to the public since the 1970s due to geological instability. Really, it was closed because of the old settlement ruins up there, the remnants of a religious commune that had problems back in the 60s. Following the prints, I noticed something that should have been my first warning. The forest had gone completely silent. No bird calls, no insect hum, no rustling of small mammals in the undergrowth. Just my own breathing and the soft squelch of my boots in the damp earth. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees, and I could see my breath clearly now despite it being barely past noon. My rational mind cataloged these observations. Weather front moving in, animals seeking shelter, standard autumn temperature fluctuation. But something deeper, something primal that lived in the stem of my brain, was screaming at me to turn around. That's when I heard the crying. High-pitched, desperate sobbing echoed through the trees ahead. A child's voice, maybe 8 or 9 years old, calling for help. My training kicked in immediately. Lost child takes priority over everything. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch Unit 7. I've got possible additional missing person, juvenile, coordinates 47.9891 to Gan, 123.8456 to W, moving to investigate." The radio responded with static, complete dead air. Not unusual in the deeper parts of the park where the canopy interfered with signal transmission. I moved toward the crying, following the sound through a stand of western hemlock that grew so thick the forest floor existed in permanent twilight. The sobbing got louder, more desperate, punctuated by a small voice calling, "Help me! Please help me!" Every instinct I'd developed over 2 decades told me to proceed with caution, but the sound of a terrified child overrode my hesitation. I pushed through the undergrowth, branches catching at my uniform, and emerged into a small clearing I'd never seen before despite patrolling this area for years. In the center of the clearing, maybe 30 feet away, stood a little girl in a faded yellow dress. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to almost glow in the filtered sunlight. She was crying, arms wrapped around herself, looking lost and terrified. Behind her I could make out the shapes of other children, maybe 5 or 6 of them, huddled together in what looked like fear. My heart rate spiked. Multiple missing children. How had there been no reports? "Hey there," I called out, using the calm, reassuring tone I'd perfected over years of dealing with frightened hikers. "I'm Cole. I'm a park ranger. Are you hurt?" The little girl looked up at me with eyes that seemed too dark, too deep, like looking into abandoned wells. She shook her head and extended one small hand toward me. "We're lost," she said in a voice that seemed to echo strangely in the clearing. "We've been lost for so long. Can you help us find our way home?" Something was wrong. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt that primitive alarm system firing warning signals I couldn't consciously identify. The children's clothes looked old. Not vintage, not retro, but genuinely aged, like they'd been weathered by decades of exposure, and there was a smell in the air, faint but growing stronger, the sweet sick scent of decay underlying something else, something that made my stomach clench with inexplicable dread. I was reaching for my radio to call for backup when I saw Zoe. She was walking out of the tree line on the far side of the clearing, moving with the slow, mechanical gait of someone in a trance. Her eyes were open, but vacant, staring straight ahead at nothing. The little girl in the yellow dress turned to her and smiled, and that smile... Christ, that smile was all wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. Teeth that seemed to go back too far into her mouth, creating shadows that hurt to look at. "Zoe!" I shouted, breaking into a run toward her. "Zoe, stop!" But she didn't react to my voice at all. She just kept walking toward the group of children with that empty, sleepwalking expression. I was maybe 3 meters behind her when she simply wasn't there anymore. Not like she vanished in a puff of smoke or faded away gradually. 1 second she was directly in front of me. The next second the space she occupied was empty air, like she had never existed at all. I stumbled to a stop in the exact spot where she'd been, my hands frantically searching empty air, my mind trying to process what I'd just witnessed. "What the fuck?" I whispered, then louder. "What the fuck?" This was impossible. People don't just disappear. There had to be a rational explanation. Optical illusion. Fatigue-induced hallucination. Carbon monoxide poisoning from what? We were in the middle of a goddamn forest. The little girl's laughter made my blood freeze. It started as normal child's giggling, but it went on too long, got too loud, and began to harmonize with itself in ways that human voices simply cannot harmonize. The other children joined in, creating a chorus of overlapping laughter that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Above me, below me, inside my own skull. The sound violated something fundamental about how reality was supposed to work. I spun around to face them, my hand instinctively moving to the Glock 22 on my hip, and that's when I saw their faces clearly for the first time. They weren't children. They had never been children. Oh, they had the approximate size and shape of children. But their faces were like someone's childhood memory of what children looked like, filtered through decades of degradation and corrupted by something that hated the very concept of innocence. Their eyes were solid black, not just the irises, but the entire eye, like looking into holes punched through reality itself. Their skin had a waxy, translucent quality, and I could see dark veins branching underneath like the root system of some poisonous plant. When they smiled, and they were all smiling now, their mouths opened too wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that gleamed wet in the dim light. "We've been waiting for you, Ranger Harrison," the little girl said, and her voice was no longer the voice of a child but something older than the mountains, older than the trees, older than human civilization. "We've been waiting so very long to show you the truth about this place, about what happened here, about what we really are." The rational part of my mind, the part that had spent decades explaining away the impossible, was screaming denials. Mass hallucination, psychological break, temporal lobe epilepsy. But another part of me, a part I'd spent my entire adult life suppressing, knew with horrible certainty that I was seeing something real, something that existed in the spaces between normal reality, something that human minds weren't designed to comprehend. The clearing began to change around us. The trees grew taller, their trunks stretching impossibly high until they disappeared into a sky that was no longer October blue, but a sick, pulsing purple. The ground beneath my feet started to feel unstable, like I was standing on the surface of a vast body of water rather than solid earth. Distances became meaningless. The children seemed simultaneously 30 feet away and close enough to touch, and when I tried to focus on any one of them, my vision would slide away like they were coated in something my eyes refused to process. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Cole Harrison's situation? Comment below. You want to know where Zoe Martinez is? The thing wearing the yellow dress asked. You want to understand what happened to all the others who wandered into our domain over the decades? Look closer, Ranger Harrison. Look with eyes that aren't clouded by your precious rational mind. And God help me, I did look closer. I looked past the surface appearance of the clearing, past the illusion of normalcy, and I saw the truth that had been hidden there for more than 50 years. The clearing wasn't a clearing at all. It was a crater, a perfectly circular depression in the earth that descended down, down, down into darkness that seemed to have depth and weight and hunger. The trees around us weren't trees, but massive stone columns carved with symbols that hurt to perceive directly. symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when I wasn't looking at them straight on. And scattered around the edges of the pit, arranged in careful patterns that followed no geometry I recognized, were bones. Human bones. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The commune, I whispered, understanding flooding through me like ice water in my veins. The religious commune from the 60s, they didn't just disappear. They opened something, they called something through. The Not children clapped their hands in delighted applause, the sound echoing with impossible reverberations. Such a smart ranger, the yellow dress thing cooed. Yes, the faithful servants of the Crimson Dawn commune successfully completed their great working in 1966. They opened a door to let us through, and we have been so grateful for their sacrifice. They continue to serve us still, you know. Would you like to see them? Before I could answer, before I could even think about running, the ground around the pit began to move. The earth cracked and heaved, and shapes began emerging from the soil like plants growing in accelerated time. But these weren't plants. These were people, or what had once been people. They crawled up from underground chambers that couldn't possibly exist, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by a drunk puppeteer. Their clothes were the faded remnants of 1960s hippie garb, tie-dyed shirts, bell-bottom jeans, flower print dresses, but the fabric was rotted and stained with substances I didn't want to identify. Their skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that had grown in directions bones weren't meant to grow. And their faces? Christ, their faces still held echoes of the young idealists they'd once been, but corrupted by decades of serving entities that existed outside human comprehension. Their eyes had been replaced with the same black voids as the children, and their mouths moved constantly, whispering prayers in languages that predated human speech. They call to us, one of the shambling figures said, its voice like wind through a graveyard. They call across the vast distances between stars, and we answer. We bring the young ones, the pure ones, to feed the endless hunger. We prepare the way for the great return. I understood then what had happened to Zoe, what had happened to all the missing hikers over the years whose cases had been closed as presumed dead, body never recovered. The commune hadn't just opened a door, they'd become a recruitment mechanism for something cosmic and alien and utterly hostile to human existence. They used the Not children as bait, luring people into the clearing where reality was thin, where the barriers between dimensions could be more easily breached. My radio crackled to life suddenly, but instead of dispatch, I heard Zoe's voice. Cole? Cole? Can you hear me? I'm somewhere dark. There are others here, so many others. They're singing, Cole. They're singing to something in the darkness, something that's getting closer. You have to help us. You have to... The transmission cut off in a burst of static that resolved into something else entirely. Music, chanting, voices raised in harmonies that followed mathematical principles that shouldn't exist, creating sound that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the bones. It was beautiful and terrible and wrong, so fundamentally wrong that listening to it felt like a violation of natural law. The Not children began to move toward me, their movements becoming more fluid, more predatory. It's time for you to join them, Ranger Harrison, the yellow dress thing said. Time for you to understand your true purpose. You've been protecting this forest for so long, never knowing that you've been protecting us. Shepherding the lost ones right into our waiting arms. That's when the final horror hit me. All those years, all those rescues, all those missing persons cases I'd worked, how many of them had I inadvertently led to this place? How many people had I failed to find? Because they'd been taken to feed whatever cosmic hunger lurked in the spaces between reality. I thought of every case I'd closed as presumed dead, every family I'd had to comfort with empty promises about doing everything possible. I was backing away from the approaching figures when my boot hit something in the tall grass. I looked down and saw my own badge. My ranger badge, tarnished and weathered, lying in the dirt like it had been there for years. But that was impossible. My badge was still pinned to my uniform shirt. I could feel the weight of it against my chest. I reached up to touch it and my hand passed through empty air. I looked down at myself and screamed. I was transparent. Not invisible, but translucent, like I was becoming a ghost while still alive. I could see through my own hands to the ground beneath, could see my organs pulsing with a faint phosphorescent glow that hurt to perceive. The rational part of my mind that had clung so desperately to explanations and logic finally snapped completely. "What did you do to me?" I screamed at the Not children. "What the fuck did you do to me?" They laughed, that impossible harmonizing laugh again. "We didn't do anything, Ranger Harrison. This is what we are. This is what you've always been. Ever since that first day you walked into our forest 23 years ago. You just never realized it." The memories came flooding back then. Memories that had been locked away behind walls of rationality and denial. I remembered my first day on the job, how I'd gotten lost during a routine patrol and found myself in this same clearing. I remembered the Not children approaching me with their innocent faces and pleading voices. I remembered the sensation of falling through layers of reality until I landed somewhere dark and full of hungry whispers. And I remembered being sent back, being told that I had a job to do, a purpose to serve, protecting the forest, guiding the lost ones, feeding the endless appetite of entities that existed in the spaces between stars. "You've been dead for 23 years, the yellow dress thing informed me with mock sympathy. "You've been one of us all along, Ranger Harrison, a faithful servant of the Crimson Dawn, just like the others. Every person you've failed to rescue, every case you've closed, you've been fulfilling your true purpose perfectly." I thought of my wife Sarah, of our 2 kids, of the life I thought I'd been living. Had any of it been real? Were they real? Or had I been haunting the forest all these years, a ghost playing at being human while serving masters I couldn't comprehend? The answer came in the form of my reflection in a stagnant pool of water near the edge of the pit. The face looking back at me wasn't the face I'd been seeing in mirrors for decades. It was my face, but wrong, corrupted. My eyes had begun to develop those same black depths as the others, and my skin had taken on that waxy, translucent quality. When I opened my mouth to scream again, I saw rows of sharp teeth gleaming in the darkness. "Welcome home, brother," the commune members whispered in unison. "Welcome to the true forest, the forest that exists between worlds, where we tend our garden of lost souls and sing our songs to the darkness between stars." The clearing began to expand, or maybe I was shrinking until the pit stretched to the horizons and the sky above pulsed with the rhythm of some cosmic heartbeat. I could see figures moving in the depths below. Hundreds of them, thousands of them, all the missing persons from decades of failed searches. They were arranged in vast spirals that followed patterns too complex for human minds to fully process. And they were singing. All of them singing that mathematically impossible harmony that called to something vast and alien and patient. Zoe Martinez was just the beginning, the yellow dress thing told me. She was the key that would finally unlock your true memories, your true purpose. Now you can guide us to the others. All the others. Every hiker, every camper, every lost soul who wanders into our domain. You know them all, don't you? You know exactly where to find them. And God help me, I did know. I could feel them out there in the forest. Dozens of people hiking the trails, camping in the designated areas, thinking they were safe under the protection of the Park Service. I could sense their locations with perfect clarity, could map out the most efficient routes to guide them all to this place of impossible geometry and cosmic hunger. But there was something else, something the entities hadn't counted on. Deep beneath the layers of alien corruption and supernatural manipulation, the core of who Cole Harrison had been was still fighting. The part of me that had chosen to become a ranger because I genuinely wanted to protect people, to help them find their way home safely, was screaming in fury at what I'd been made to do. I thought of every family I'd comforted, every successful rescue I'd completed, every time I'd risked my own safety to bring someone home alive. Those memories felt real in a way that the cosmic horror around me didn't. They had weight and substance and meaning that transcended the alien mathematics of the entity that had claimed me. "No," I said quietly, then louder, "No." The Not children stopped their advance, their eternal smiles faltering for the first time. You cannot resist, the yellow dress thing said, but there was uncertainty in its voice now. You belong to us. You have always belonged to us. Maybe I have, I admitted, feeling something like determination building in what remained of my chest. Maybe you did kill me 23 years ago, and maybe I have been your puppet all this time. But if that's true, then I've got 23 years of innocent blood on my hands, and the only way I can make up for that is to make sure you don't get any more. I pulled out my service weapon, though I wasn't sure what good it would do against entities that existed outside normal space-time, but it wasn't the gun I was planning to use as a weapon. It was the emergency beacon clipped to my belt, the GPS locator that would signal my exact coordinates to park headquarters in case of emergency. If I'm already dead, I said, my finger hovering over the activation button, then I've got nothing to lose. But you need this place to stay hidden, don't you? You need people to come here voluntarily, guided by someone they trust. What happens if Park Service sends a full search and rescue team to these exact coordinates? What happens if they bring specialists, scientists, people who might be able to understand what you really are? The entities began to move toward me with desperate urgency, but I was already pressing the button. The beacon would transmit my location to headquarters every 30 seconds until manually deactivated. In 6 hours, when I failed to check in for end of shift, they'd come looking for me. They'd bring the whole team, maybe even federal investigators if the circumstances seemed strange enough. You stupid, small-minded fool, the yellow dress thing snarled, its innocent facade finally dropping completely. You have no idea what forces you're interfering with. We have been patient for 50 years, building our strength, preparing for the great return. We will not be stopped by one ignorant puppet who's forgotten his place. The world around me began to collapse inward, reality folding and twisting as the entities tried to contain the damage I'd caused. But the beacon kept transmitting, its signal cutting through dimensions and cosmic barriers to reach the mundane, wonderful, rational world of emergency response protocols and search and rescue procedures. I felt myself being pulled apart at the molecular level, my consciousness scattered across probability curves that had no business intersecting with linear time. But even as my sense of self dissolved into quantum uncertainty, I held on to one final thought. I'd been a puppet for 23 years, helping these things feed on innocent people. But in the end, for the last few seconds of my existence, I'd managed to be a real ranger again. The last thing I remember was the sound of helicopters approaching from the east, and the furious, impossible screaming of entities that had spent decades hiding in the spaces between worlds, suddenly exposed to the harsh light of human investigation and scientific scrutiny. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Zoe Martinez. I read every single one. Author's note: the Olympic National Park referenced in this story is a real location, but the events described are entirely fictional. The Forest Service does amazing work protecting our natural spaces and the people who visit them. If you're planning to hike in any national park, please follow proper safety protocols, inform others of your planned route, and carry appropriate emergency equipment. The real dangers of wilderness areas, getting lost, weather changes, wildlife encounters, are serious enough without adding cosmic horror to the mix. My name is Travis Coleman, and I should have forgotten the case of Mia Gonzalez, but something brought me back to that cursed forest. It was October 23rd, 2019, and I'd been working the North Cascades National Park for exactly 4 months. Long enough to know which trails flooded first when the autumn rains hit, but not long enough to understand why the older rangers went silent whenever someone mentioned the Thornwood sector. I was still the outsider, the guy from Colorado who didn't know the local stories, didn't understand the unwritten rules about which coordinates we avoided after dark. The manila folder sat on my kitchen table like a cancer, its edges worn from my obsessive handling over the past 3 weeks. Gonzalez, MIA, case DARM 2019-087, status. Suspended stamped in red across the cover, 22 years old, Berkeley graduate student researching mycological networks. Last seen September 15th at trail marker 47 in Thornwood sector. Coordinates 48.7128 Degron N, 121 tons 0681 Degron W. Equipment recovered. Backpack, water bottles, research notes. Personal effects recovered. None. Body recovered. None. The case had been officially suspended after 2 weeks of intensive searching. The lead ranger, a 30-year veteran named Marcus Webb, had personally signed off on it. Sometimes the forest keeps what it takes, he'd told me, and something in his eyes made me not ask follow-up questions. But 3 days ago, a hiker found something that changed everything. At 6:47 a.m., my Motorola radio crackled to life. Unit 23, this is base. We need you at coordinates 48.7094 degree N, 121.07.2 degree W, priority 1. Those coordinates were less than half a mile from where Mia had vanished. The taste of my morning coffee turned metallic as I grabbed my gear. GPS unit, emergency medical kit, climbing rope, my grandfather's mag light that had never failed me. The autumn air carried that sharp bite of early frost, and as I hiked toward the coordinates, my breath formed small clouds that seemed to linger longer than they should have. I found the hiker, a guy named Jeff Morrison from Tacoma, standing 10 feet back from a Douglas fir that had to be at least 300 years old. He was pale, shaking slightly, and kept glancing over his shoulder. "I was taking pictures of the root systems," Jeff said, his voice barely above a whisper, "for my botany blog, and I saw this. Carved into the ancient bark, about 7 feet up the trunk, were symbols I'd never seen before. Not the usual graffiti or trail markers. These were precise geometric patterns that seemed to hurt my eyes when I looked at them directly. They appeared freshly cut, the wood still weeping sap, but the bark around them looked decades old. Below the symbols, driven into the tree with what must have been incredible force, was a piece of metal that made my stomach drop. A fragment of Mia's research equipment. I recognized the serial number from the evidence photos. "When did you discover this?" I asked Jeff, pulling out my digital camera. "About 20 minutes ago. But here's the thing." Jeff's voice cracked. "I've been hiking this exact trail every week for 5 years. This tree wasn't here yesterday." The words hit me like ice water. I looked around, really looked, and felt reality tilt slightly. The Douglas fir stood in what should have been a small meadow according to my GPS. I'd been through this exact spot during the Mia Gonzalez search. There had been no massive tree here 6 weeks ago. "That's impossible," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I could feel the wrongness in the air. The forest was too quiet. Not the peaceful quiet of autumn woods, but the oppressive silence that comes right before something terrible happens. Jeff was already backing away. "I'm leaving, man. This whole area feels like it's watching us." I couldn't argue with that. The sensation of being observed was so strong it was making my skin crawl. But I was a park ranger, and this was evidence in a missing person case. I had to document everything. After Jeff left, I spent 2 hours photographing the symbols from every angle, taking measurements, collecting bark samples. My iPhone showed full battery when I started, but by the time I finished, it was dead. The GPS unit was acting erratic, showing my location as coordinates that didn't exist on any map. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those symbols burning behind my eyelids. I found myself sketching them over and over on scratch paper, my hand moving without conscious thought. When I finally looked at what I'd drawn, ice flooded my veins. The symbols were different now, more complex, and I had no memory of drawing the additional details. I called the Forest Service Archive office in Seattle the next morning. "I need everything you have on the Thornwood sector," I told the archivist, a woman named Sarah Chen. "Historical records, incident reports, anything going back as far as you have." "That's a restricted section," Sarah said immediately. "I'd need authorization from your supervisor." "Restricted how?" A long pause. "Let me transfer you to my supervisor." 20 minutes and 3 transfers later, I was connected to a man who identified himself only as Mr. Davidson. "Officer Coleman." Davidson's voice was crisp, professional, and somehow deeply unsettling. "I understand you're requesting historical files on the Thornwood sector." "That's right. I'm investigating a missing person case. The Gonzalez case was officially closed." The fact that he knew which case I was referring to without me mentioning it sent warning bells screaming in my head. Suspended, not closed, and I've found new evidence. Another long pause. "Officer Coleman, I'm going to give you some advice. The Thornwood sector has been problematic for our agency since the 1960s. Some cases are better left undisturbed, for everyone's safety." "What happened in the 1960s? I think this conversation is over. Good day, Officer Coleman." The line went dead. That afternoon, I did something that probably violated half a dozen regulations. I drove to the University of Washington Library and started digging through historical newspaper archives on my own. What I found made me wish I'd listened to Davidson's warning. Seattle Times, November 13th, 1966. Cultists arrested in Cascade Mountains. Federal agents raided a compound in the North Cascades yesterday, arresting 23 members of a group calling itself the Order of the Hollow Earth. The cult, led by a former geology professor named Dr. Edmund Blackwood, was reportedly engaged in dangerous excavation activities and illegal geometric modifications to protected forest land. 7 cult members remain unaccounted for. The compound has been sealed by federal order. Seattle Post-Intelligencer, November 20th, 1966. Missing cultists found dead. The bodies of 4 additional Order of the Hollow Earth members were discovered in what authorities are calling unusual circumstances in the Cascade Wilderness. The victims appeared to have died of exposure, but were found wearing summer clothing despite freezing temperatures, and showed signs of what one investigator described as geometric trauma. 3 cult members remain missing and are presumed dead. Bellingham Herald, November 27, 1966. Federal cover-up alleged in cult deaths. Local residents are demanding answers after federal agencies classified all details of the recent cult investigation. "They're not telling us what really happened up there," said Martha Reeves, whose property borders the former cult compound. "My husband saw lights in those mountains for weeks after they supposedly cleared everyone out. Not normal lights, lights that moved in patterns no human would make." Federal officials declined to comment. And then, nothing. The story vanished from the newspapers as if it had never existed. But I kept digging, and in a 1987 academic journal about Pacific Northwest geology, I found a footnote that stopped my heart. Thornwood sector geological surveys discontinued indefinitely due to instrumentation failures and temporal inconsistencies in rock dating. All research materials classified under Federal Archaeological Protection Act. Temporal inconsistencies, like a 300-year-old tree appearing overnight. That evening, I made a decision that would shatter my understanding of reality forever. I was going back to Thornwood sector, at night, alone. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Travis Coleman's situation? Comment below. The drive to the trailhead took 45 minutes through winding mountain roads. My headlights carved through a darkness that seemed thicker than it should have been, like the air itself was absorbing light. The radio in my truck started picking up strange interference. Not static, but what sounded like voices speaking in mathematical sequences. I parked at the Thornwood sector access point at 11:23 p.m. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, and my breath formed clouds that lingered in the still air like accusatory ghosts. I checked my gear, GPS, radio, emergency supplies, and my grandfather's mag light. The flashlight felt heavier than usual, its weight somehow comforting against the oppressive darkness. The trail markers reflected my flashlight beam like eyes in the darkness. Trail marker 23, 31, 39. Each number brought me deeper into territory that felt increasingly hostile to human presence. The forest around me was unnaturally silent. No owl calls, no rustle of small animals, not even the whisper of wind through branches. At trail marker 45, My GPS started acting erratic. The coordinates kept shifting, showing impossible readings that placed me simultaneously in Washington State and in what appeared to be the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The elevation reading fluctuated wildly between 3,200 feet and 847 feet. 2 markers later, I found the tree. It was exactly where it had been that morning, but now it was different. Larger. The symbols carved into its bark were glowing with a faint, sickly phosphorescence that made my eyes water, and there were more symbols now. Complex geometric patterns that seemed to extend all the way around the massive trunk. But what made me stop breathing was what I saw at the base of the tree. Mia's missing research equipment was arranged in a perfect circle around the trunk. Not scattered by animals or weather, but placed with deliberate precision. Her laptop, unopened. Her collection containers, arranged by size. Her field notebook, open to a page covered with the same symbols that were carved into the tree, in Mia's handwriting. I approached the notebook with shaking hands. The pages were dry, despite 6 weeks of Pacific Northwest autumn weather. As I read her entries, my understanding of reality began to unravel. September 14th, day 12 of mycological network mapping. Something wrong with the fungal networks here. They're not following normal growth patterns. It's like they're organized. Purposeful. GPS readings inconsistent. September 15th, found geometric formations in tree root systems, not natural, taking samples for analysis. Starting to suspect this area was deliberately modified decades ago. September 15th, later. The symbols are everywhere once you know how to look. Carved into rocks, grown into tree bark, embedded in the soil itself. They hurt to look at directly. Feel like they're looking back. September 15th, evening. They're here. The order never left. They just learned to hide better. They've been waiting. The excavation in 1966 wasn't shut down. It was completed. They opened something that should have stayed closed. September 15th, final entry. I understand now. The forest isn't just hiding them. The forest is them. The trees, the soil, the very geometry of this place has been altered to serve as a gateway. Mia Gonzalez will be reported missing tomorrow, but I won't be missing. I'll be exactly where they need me to be, where we all need to be when the stars align correctly. The Order of the Hollow Earth never worshipped the earth. They worshipped what lies beneath it, what lies beneath everything. And soon, very soon, it will rise. The final entry was dated September 15th, but the ink looked fresh, wet. I backed away from the notebook, my flashlight beam dancing frantically across the impossible tree. That's when I noticed the other trees. All around me, in what had been empty forest that morning, ancient Douglas firs now stood in perfect geometric formation, each one carved with symbols that pulsed with that same sickly light. My radio crackled to life, but instead of dispatch, I heard Mia's voice. "Travis, you came back, just like they said you would." "Mia? Mia, where are you?" "I'm here. I'm everywhere. I'm in the network now. The mycological network they built in 1966. We're all in the network, Travis. Everyone who ever went missing in Thornwood Sector. We're all still here, all still serving the purpose." The GPS unit in my hand showed coordinates that couldn't exist. 48D-DN 121. 1agree-W. What purpose, Mia? The Order of the Hollow Earth wasn't wrong about what lies beneath our reality, Travis. They were just early. 53 years early. But they built the infrastructure. The geometric modifications to space-time. The living network that could sustain consciousness after biological death. They built it all, and we've been maintaining it, feeding it, preparing it. All around me, the trees began to move. Not swaying, moving. Roots pulled up from soil that suddenly seemed liquid, repositioning themselves in new geometric arrangements. The very ground beneath my feet shifted, and I realized with cosmic horror that I wasn't standing in a forest anymore. I was standing inside something vast and living and utterly alien. Preparing it for what? October 31st, 2019. Halloween. The 53rd anniversary of the first successful excavation. The stars will be right, the geometry will be perfect, and the hollow earth will finally hollow through. Not just here, everywhere. Reality will be excavated, Travis. Hollowed out and replaced with something that makes space for what has always been waiting. The trees weren't trees anymore. They were fingers. Massive wooden fingers emerging from something unimaginably large buried beneath the entire mountain range. The Order of the Hollow Earth hadn't been worshipping some mystical underground realm. They'd been worshipping something that used the entire planet as a shell. Something that had been patient enough to wait eons for the right moment to crack that shell open from the inside. Why are you telling me this, Mia? Because you're the outsider, Travis. You don't know the local legends, the unwritten rules, the things we all agreed never to speak about. You're the only one who might still be able to stop it. Or, you're the final component they need. My flashlight beam revealed figures moving between the finger trees. Human shapes, but wrong. People who'd gone missing in these mountains over decades, their bodies modified by integration with the mycological network, their consciousness sustained by the geometric patterns carved into reality itself. Marcus Webb was there, the veteran ranger who'd closed Mia's case. But is Marcus Webb from 1987 still young, still wearing the uniform style from 30 years ago? Next to him stood hikers from the 1990s, campers from the 2000s, researchers from just last year, all of them existing simultaneously in a space where time had been excavated and replaced with something more useful to whatever lay beneath. The choice is yours, Travis. Mia's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Join the network willingly and retain some fragment of who you are. Fight it and be excavated completely. Your consciousness scraped out and replaced with pure purpose. I ran. My boots pounded against earth that shifted and flowed beneath me, trying to trip me, trying to hold me. The GPS unit in my pocket screamed coordinates that hurt to think about. Behind me, the sound of reality being systematically dismantled grew louder. Not just trees moving, but the fundamental geometry of space being rebuilt according to patterns that human minds weren't designed to comprehend. I reached my truck and gunned the engine, tires spinning on ground that had become something between soil and flesh. In my rearview mirror, I watched the entire Thornwood sector fold in on itself like origami made of landscape, compressing down into a single point of impossible darkness before expanding again into new configurations. The radio in my truck picked up emergency broadcasts from all over the Pacific Northwest. Geological anomalies, simultaneous earthquakes with no apparent cause, reports of structural inconsistencies in the fundamental nature of matter itself. It was starting. I drove through the night, calling every federal agency I could think of, trying to explain what I'd discovered. Most calls went to voicemail. The few that connected were transferred, put on hold, and eventually disconnected. When I finally reached someone at the Forest Service emergency line, they told me that according to their records, there was no Travis Coleman employed by the National Park Service. According to their records, there never had been. I made it to Seattle by dawn, but the city I found wasn't quite the Seattle I remembered. The buildings were the same, the streets were the same, but the angles were wrong. Corners that should have been 90 degrees were slightly off, creating perspective illusions that made my eyes water. The people looked normal from a distance, but when I got close enough to see their faces clearly, their expressions were too uniform, too purposeful. The excavation had already begun. In a 24-hour internet cafe in what I hoped was still called Capitol Hill, I'm writing this account on a computer that keeps trying to auto-correct my words into symbols I don't recognize. The screen flickers occasionally, showing glimpses of vast dark spaces that extend infinitely downward. Today is October 30th, 2019. I have less than 24 hours to find someone who will believe this. Someone who might know how to stop what's coming. But I'm starting to suspect that I was never meant to stop it. That finding Mia's research, discovering the truth about the Order of the Hollow Earth, even writing this account, it's all been part of the pattern, part of the geometric modification of reality that began in 1966 and is finally reaching completion. The Hollow Earth was never a place beneath our world. It was what our world becomes when something infinitely larger decides to use it as a tool. If you're reading this, and if October 31st, 2019 has already passed, and if the world around you seems somehow different, angles slightly off, people slightly too purposeful, reality slightly too flexible, then you'll know the excavation was successful. And you'll know that somewhere in the network that spans beneath everything, Mia Gonzalez and Travis Coleman and all the others are still serving their purpose, maintaining the geometric patterns that keep the new reality stable. Welcome to the Hollow Earth. We've been waiting for you. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Mia Gonzalez and Travis Coleman. I read every single one. My name is Ben Sawyer, and I saw Ryan Michael Davis for the last time 3 meters ahead of me on the trail before he simply vanished. It was October 15th, 2018, 3:47 p.m. according to my Garmin GPS, when the impossible became my reality. The autumn air carried that crisp bite that made your lungs burn just right, and the maples were bleeding their annual sacrifice of gold and crimson across Blackwater Ridge State Forest. I was 6 months into my ranger position, still eager as hell to prove I belonged among the weathered veterans who'd been protecting these 47,000 acres since before I was born. Ryan was a college kid from State University, 22 years old, with that infectious laugh that reminded me of my younger brother. He'd been hiking the Widow's Peak Trail solo, against protocol, but kids that age think they're bulletproof. I'd been doing my afternoon patrol when I spotted his blue North Face jacket through the pines, about 30 yards off the marked trail. "Hey there," I'd called out, my voice echoing off the granite outcroppings that gave this ridge its name. "You're wandering into some pretty rough terrain." Ryan had turned, flashing that easy college smile, his brown hair tousled from the mountain wind. "Sorry, Ranger. Just wanted to get some photos of those rock formations. My geology professor would kill for shots like these." That's when I noticed his eyes. Even from 20 feet away, something was off. They seemed darker than they should have been, like shadows were pooling in his irises. But I chalked it up to the late afternoon light filtering through the canopy. "Let me escort you back to the main trail," I'd said, adjusting the weight of my patrol pack across my shoulders. The radio crackled with routine check-ins from other units, and I keyed my mic. "Unit 23 to base, escorting a hiker back to Widow's Peak Main Trail. GPS coordinates 41.2734, 74.5891. "Copy that, Unit 23. Weather Service is calling for temperature drop after sunset." Ryan had nodded agreeably and started walking ahead of me down the deer path that would intersect with the marked trail about 50 yards through the hardwoods. I stayed behind him, close enough to guide but far enough to give him space. Standard procedure for my third solo patrol of the week. The forest felt wrong. It's hard to explain to someone who's never spent serious time in the wilderness, but forests have their own heartbeat. The whisper of wind through leaves, the distant drumming of woodpeckers, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. It creates this living symphony that becomes as familiar as your own breathing when you spend 40 hours a week among the trees. But as we walked, that symphony began to die. First, the birds went quiet. Not unusual by itself. Sometimes a hawk or owl will silence smaller birds for miles around. But this was different. This was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, like something fundamental about the world had just stopped. Ryan was still walking ahead of me, his hiking boots crunching through the carpet of maple leaves, but his gait had changed. Instead of that loose, casual stride college kids have, his movements were becoming more deliberate, mechanical, like he was walking to a beat only he could hear. "Ryan?" I called. "You doing okay up there?" He didn't respond, just kept walking at that same measured pace. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees in the past 5 minutes, and my breath was starting to mist. My department-issued Motorola radio suddenly erupted with static so violent it made me wince and turn down the volume. That's when I saw the shadows. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks. The afternoon sun was slanting through the trees at sharp angles, creating those dancing patterns of light and dark that can make you see movement where there isn't any. but these shadows were moving independently of their sources, creeping along the ground like living things, reaching toward Ryan with what looked like grasping fingers. My heart started hammering against my ribs hard enough that I could feel my pulse in my ears. I'd been a ranger for 6 months, but I'd been hunting and camping in these mountains my whole life. I knew what shadows were supposed to do, and this wasn't it. "Ryan!" I shouted, breaking into a jog to close the distance between us. "Stop right there!" That's when he turned around. The thing wearing Ryan's face smiled at me with teeth that were too sharp and too many. His eyes were completely black now. Not just dark, but utterly absent of light, like looking into a pair of deep wells at midnight. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a human throat. "Hello, young ranger," it said with Ryan's lips. "The widow has been waiting for you." I went for my radio, my training kicking in even as my rational mind struggled to process what I was seeing. But when I keyed the mic, the only sound that came out was that same violent static, punctuated by what sounded like whispered voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. The thing that looked like Ryan took a step toward me, and the shadows on the ground surged forward like a black tide. I stumbled backward, my hand going instinctively to the bear spray on my utility belt, even though every instinct I had was screaming that this was way beyond bears. "What did you do with Ryan?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where is he?" The false Ryan tilted its head, and I heard something in its neck crack with a sound like breaking branches. "He's safe, for now. The widow needs him for the blood moon tomorrow night, but you're an unexpected gift." The shadows had reached my boots, and where they touched, I felt a cold so intense it burned. I looked down and watched in horror as the leather began to crack and split, like it was aging decades in seconds. The cold shot up my legs, carrying with it a pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced, not just physical agony, but something that felt like it was freezing my soul. I stumbled backward, pulling my feet free from the shadow touch, and felt pieces of my boot soles tear away. The skin underneath was pale and numb, shot through with black veins that pulsed with each heartbeat. "What the hell are you?" I gasped, backing up against the rough bark of a massive oak tree. The false Ryan's smile stretched wider than any human mouth should be able to manage. "I am her voice, her eyes, her hands in this world. The Shadow Witch of Blackwater Ridge has walked these mountains since before your ancestors stole them from the Seneca. She remembers when the blood flowed freely, when the old ways were honored." My back hit the tree trunk, and I felt the bark begin to crack and blacken where my body touched it. Whatever this thing was, whatever the widow was, my mere proximity to its influence was causing everything around me to rot and die. But I thought about my wife Sarah, probably making dinner right now in our little cabin 15 miles down the mountain. I thought about our 8-year-old daughter Emma, who'd made me promise to bring her a really cool rock from my patrol today. I thought about Ryan's parents, who would be expecting him home for Sunday dinner, not knowing their son was trapped somewhere in this nightmare. I reached for my duty weapon, a Glock 22 that I'd qualified expert with but had never drawn outside the range. The weight of it felt reassuring in my hands, even though I suspected bullets weren't going to solve this problem. "Where's Ryan?" I repeated, aiming center mass at the thing wearing his face. "I want to see him. Now." The false Ryan laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in my ears. The shadows around us began to writhe and coalesce, rising from the ground like smoke given substance. Within them, I caught glimpses of shapes that might have been human once, twisted figures with too many joints and faces frozen in eternal screams. "You want to see your lost lamb?" it hissed. "Look closer, Ranger. Look with eyes unclouded by your small mortal understanding." The world around me shifted, like looking through water that suddenly cleared. The familiar hardwood forest was still there, but now I could see through it to something else, a reflection of our world painted in shades of decay and shadow. The trees were gnarled and leafless, their branches reaching toward a sky the color of old blood. The ground was cracked and barren, littered with bones that gleamed white in the sickly light. And there, suspended 20 feet in the air by chains of shadow that pierced his wrists and ankles, was Ryan. The real Ryan. He was still alive, but barely. His clothes were shredded, his skin marked with symbols that looked like they'd been carved with claws. Blood, so much blood, painted abstract patterns across his chest and arms. His head lolled forward, and I could see his lips moving in what might have been prayers or pleas. "Ryan!" I shouted, and his head snapped up. When our eyes met, I saw recognition flash across his face, followed immediately by terror. "Ben," he croaked, his voice barely audible. Don't let her. The moon tomorrow. She needs..." The false Ryan, or whatever puppet the witch was using, backhanded me across the face with impossible strength. I felt my cheekbone crack and tasted blood as I hit the ground hard enough to drive the air from my lungs. When I looked up, spitting teeth and gore, the shadow realm was gone, just normal forest again. But I could still hear Ryan screaming. If this story's giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Ben Sawyer's situation? Comment below. I rolled to my feet, ignoring the nauseating pain radiating from my fractured face, and emptied my magazine into the thing wearing Ryan's skin. The bullets passed right through it like it was made of smoke, gouging chunks out of the oak tree behind it. The creature's laughter grew louder with each shot until it was deafening, echoing off the mountains like thunder. My radio suddenly crackled to life with perfect clarity. "Unit 23, this is base. What's your status? We're showing weapons discharge at your location." I keyed the mic with trembling fingers. "Base, this is Unit 23. I need immediate backup at GPS coordinates 41.2734, 74.5891. Missing hiker is in extreme danger. I repeat, immediate backup required." "Copy, Unit 23. Units 15 and 27 are en route. ETA 15 minutes. Are you injured?" I looked at the false Ryan, which was now flickering in and out of existence like a bad hologram. The shadows around us were growing thicker, rising from the ground in twisting columns that seemed to reach toward something in the sky. "Negative injuries," I lied. "But, Base, you need to know. There's something in these woods. Something that's not in any of our training manuals." Static answered me. Then, "Unit 23, please repeat. Did you say there's something in the woods?" Before I could respond, the false Ryan dissolved completely, leaving behind only a pile of what looked like charcoal shaped vaguely like a human form. The shadows retreated, but I could feel them watching from the spaces between the trees, waiting. I checked my watch. 4:23 p.m. The sun would set in less than 2 hours, and the thing, the witch, had mentioned something about a blood moon tomorrow night. Whatever she needed Ryan for, whatever ritual she was planning, I had less than 24 hours to stop it. But first I had to survive the next 24 hours. The walk back to the main trail took 30 minutes that felt like 30 hours. Every shadow seemed to hide watching eyes. Every sound of wind through leaves carried whispers in that same unknown language I'd heard on the radio. My damaged boots squelched with each step, and I could feel the blackened skin on my feet cracking and bleeding. When Units 15 and 27 arrived, Rangers Mackenzie and Torres, both 20-year veterans, they took one look at my face and insisted on calling for medical evacuation. I managed to convince them to treat it as a routine injury, claiming I'd taken a fall while pursuing the missing hiker. "Any sign of the kid?" Mackenzie asked as Torres cleaned the blood from my mouth with antiseptic that burned like liquid fire. "He's out there," I said, which was technically true. "But he's in serious trouble. We need to organize a full search, bring in the K9 units, maybe contact state police for additional manpower." Torres frowned as he examined my damaged boots. "Jesus, Ben, what did you fall into? These look like they've been dipped in acid." I looked down at the cracked blackened leather and the spreading dark stains on my socks. The veins of shadow infection had crept up to my ankles now, and I could feel a constant cold ache in my bones. "Must have been some kind of mineral spring," I lied. "You know how the geology gets weird up here." They bought it, or at least pretended to, but I caught them exchanging glances when they thought I wasn't looking. Rangers develop a sixth sense for when something's wrong, and everything about this situation was screaming danger. The search was organized for first light the next morning. 24 Rangers, 6 K9 units, and 2 state police helicopters would comb every square inch of Blackwater Ridge. It was the largest search operation in the park's history, and I knew it wouldn't find Ryan. Because Ryan wasn't in our world anymore. That night I sat in my cabin with Sarah and Emma, trying to act normal while my feet slowly rotted away beneath fresh bandages. Emma showed me her homework, a report on local Native American legends she'd been working on for her 3rd grade class. "Daddy, do you know about the Shadow Witch of Blackwater Ridge?" she asked, looking up at me with those bright green eyes that were exactly like her mother's. "Mrs. Patterson says it's just a story, but Tommy's grandfather says she's real." My blood turned to ice water. What did Tommy's grandfather tell him? Emma pulled out a library book with a picture of a gaunt woman in black robes on the cover. "He says the Seneca tribe used to leave offerings for her in the old days. Food and other things, to keep her happy so she wouldn't steal their children. And every 13 years, on the blood moon in October, she wakes up and gets really hungry." I did the math in my head. The last blood moon visible from our area had been 13 years ago in October 2005. "Daddy, are you okay?" Emma asked. "You look really pale." I forced a smile and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired from work. But Emma, I want you to promise me something. If anything strange happens while I'm at work tomorrow, anything at all, you and Mommy need to pack a bag and drive to Grandma's house in Albany, okay?" "Ben," Sarah said from the kitchen doorway, her voice carrying that tone wives get when they know their husbands are keeping secrets. "What's going on? You've been acting weird since you got home." I looked at my wife. Beautiful, rational Sarah, who taught high school biology and believed in facts and evidence and logical explanations for everything. How do you tell someone like that you've stumbled into a nightmare where shadows have teeth and missing hikers get suspended in parallel dimensions by witches older than the mountains themselves? "Just work stress," I said. "This missing hiker case has everyone on edge." But that night, as Sarah slept beside me, I lay awake listening to the sounds outside our cabin. Normal mountain sounds, wind in the pines, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of raccoons in our garbage cans. But underneath it all, I swear I could hear singing. A woman's voice, low and haunting, carried on the mountain wind. The melody was beautiful and terrible, and even though I couldn't understand the words, I knew they were meant for me. An invitation, a challenge, a promise of what would happen if I failed to find Ryan before tomorrow's blood moon. At 3 a.m., my cell phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "The boy screams your name, young ranger. His blood will taste sweeter knowing you failed him. W." I stared at the message until the letters seemed to writhe on the screen like living things. Then I deleted it, pulled on my spare boots, and quietly slipped out of the cabin. The search couldn't wait for dawn. Ryan was running out of time, and so was I. The forest at night was a different creature entirely. My LED headlamp carved a cone of white light through the darkness, but it only seemed to make the shadows beyond its reach deeper and more threatening. I'd grabbed my emergency pack from the ranger station, extra batteries, emergency rations, first aid kit, and a bottle of Jack Daniels I kept for hypothermia cases but desperately needed for courage. I also brought my grandfather's hunting rifle, a .30-06 Winchester that had dropped more deer than I could count. If bullets couldn't hurt the witch's shadow puppets, maybe something with more stopping power would at least slow them down. The coordinates where Ryan had vanished were burned into my memory. 412734, 745891. A patch of forest that looked exactly like every other patch of forest in a 47,000-acre wilderness, except this one had a doorway to hell hidden somewhere in its shadows. It took me 45 minutes of hard hiking to reach the spot. The temperature had dropped to just above freezing, and my breath came out in white puffs that the LED beam turned into swirling phantoms. The pain in my feet had evolved from cold ache to burning agony, and I could feel something wet and warm soaking through my sock. The oak tree where I'd made my stand against the false Ryan loomed out of the darkness like a monument to some forgotten war. The bark where my back had touched it was completely black now, spreading outward in a pattern that looked disturbingly like a human silhouette burned into the wood. "All right," I said aloud, my voice echoing off the surrounding trees. I'm here. What do you want? The forest held its breath. No wind, no animal sounds, just the thundering of my own heart and the rasp of my breathing. Then, from somewhere that seemed both very close and impossibly far away, came the sound of laughter. Not the broken glass laughter of the false Ryan, but something infinitely worse. A woman's laughter, rich and full and completely insane. It went on and on, echoing from every direction at once, until I wanted to clap my hands over my ears and scream. When it finally stopped, she spoke. Benjamin Sawyer. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, seeming to resonate through the trees themselves. Such a brave little ranger, such a devoted husband and father. Tell me, child, how far would you go to save a stranger? I raised the rifle, though I had no target to aim at. Far enough. Where's Ryan? Close your eyes, young ranger. See with more than sight. Like hell. Close your eyes, or watch your family burn. The threat hit me like a physical blow. I thought of Sarah and Emma, safe in our cabin 15 miles away, and my hands began to shake. Slowly, reluctantly, I closed my eyes. The world exploded into sensation. I could see the shadow realm again, overlaying our reality like a double-exposed photograph. The witch stood before me now, no longer hiding behind puppets and illusions. She was tall and gaunt, her skin the color of old parchment, her hair hanging in silver-black strands that moved like they were underwater. Her dress might have been white once, but now it was stained with centuries of blood and other things I didn't want to identify. But it was her eyes that made me understand why the Seneca had left offerings to keep her satisfied. They were endless, those eyes. Not black like the false Ryans, but filled with a darkness so complete it seemed to pull at my soul just by looking into them. Beautiful, isn't it? She whispered, and her voice was like honey poured over broken glass. This is the world as it truly is, stripped of your human illusions. A place where power flows to those strong enough to take it. Around us, the shadow forest stretched away into infinity. The trees were bone white and leafless, their branches hung with what looked like cocoons. But as I watched, some of those cocoons twitched and writhed, and I realized they contained human shapes. My collection, the witch said, following my gaze. Hunters and hikers and foolish rangers who wandered too far from the path. They provide me with sustenance during the long years between awakenings. Ryan, I croaked. Where is he? She gestured to one of the larger trees, and I saw him. Ryan hung suspended 15 feet up, wrapped in shadows that pulsed like a spider's web. His eyes were open and aware, and when he saw me, he tried to speak. No sound came out, but I could read his lips. Help me. The blood moon rises tomorrow at 11:47 p.m., the witch continued conversationally. I require a sacrifice to renew my bond with this realm. Young blood, freely given. The boy will serve admirably. Freely given? I snarled. You call this freely given? She smiled, revealing teeth that were white as bone and sharp as needles. Oh, but it will be freely given, young ranger, because you're going to bring him to me willingly. The hell I am. Are you certain? With a gesture, she conjured an image in the air between us. Sarah and Emma, asleep in our bed. But now I could see shadows creeping through our cabin like smoke, sliding under doors and through window cracks. I could take them instead. The child especially would make a lovely addition to my collection. Such bright eyes, such sweet dreams. Rage exploded through me like napalm. I opened my eyes in the real world and raised the rifle, firing shot after shot into the space where the witch had been standing. The .30-06 rounds shattered tree bark and sent up sprays of dead leaves, but I might as well have been shooting at the wind. Her laughter echoed through both worlds. When the rifle clicked empty, I threw it aside and pulled out my cell phone. No signal, of course, but the phone's clock read 4:17 a.m. Less than 20 hours until the blood moon reached its peak. I had to get help. Real help. The kind of help that dealt with things modern law enforcement wasn't equipped to handle. Tommy's grandfather. Emma had mentioned him when she was talking about the witch legends. If he knew enough about the Shadow Witch to tell his grandson stories, maybe he knew enough to help me save Ryan. And if not, well, at least Sarah and Emma would be safe if I didn't make it back. The hike out of the woods took me an hour and 15 minutes. By the time I reached my patrol truck, the infection in my feet had spread to mid-calf, and I could barely feel my toes. The shadow veins were visible through my skin now, pulsing with a rhythm that didn't match my heartbeat. Tommy Crowbear lived on the Cattaraugus Reservation, about 40 minutes south of the park. I'd met him once during a joint training exercise on wilderness survival, and I remembered him as a quiet man in his 70s with intelligent eyes and hands that looked like they'd seen hard work. I found his house just as the sun was coming up over the Allegheny Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that seemed obscenely beautiful after the horrors I'd witnessed. Tommy was already awake, sitting on his front porch with a cup of coffee and an expression that suggested he'd been expecting me. "Ranger Sawyer," he said without preamble, "you look like a man who's seen the widow's true face." I stumbled up the porch steps, my infected legs barely supporting my weight. "You know about her, the witch. She has one of my hikers, and she's going to kill him tonight unless I bring him to her willingly. She threatened my family." Tommy nodded slowly and gestured for me to sit in the chair next to him. "My grandfather told me the old stories. His grandfather told him. The Shadow Witch has walked these mountains since before the white men came, and she'll walk them long after we're all dust. But she has rules, like all the old powers. Limitations. Tell me how to stop her." "You can't stop her," Tommy said simply. "She's not something you can shoot or arrest or reason with. She's elemental force given shape and hunger, but you might be able to bargain with her." "Bargain?" "She needs willing sacrifice for her ritual, someone who chooses to feed her power rather than being forced to it. But the old stories say she'll honor agreements made under the proper circumstances. If you can offer her something she wants more than the boy's blood, what could she possibly want more than that?" Tommy looked at me with eyes that held depths of sadness I couldn't begin to fathom. "A ranger who knows her territory, someone who can guide future victims to her lair. She's been hunting alone for 13 years, Ben. That's a long time for a predator to go without assistance." The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. "You're talking about me becoming her servant, like that thing wearing Ryan's face. The stories say she marks those she claims, changes them, slowly, over time, until they're more shadow than human. But they retain enough of themselves to be effective hunters." Tommy pulled up his shirt sleeve, revealing black veins running from his wrist to his elbow. "My grandfather made that bargain in 1953, when she took my aunt. He saved her, but the price... Jesus Christ, she marked you too?" "The marks passed to the firstborn male of each generation, along with the obligation to serve when called. But I've been lucky. She slept for most of my life, and when she woke 13 years ago, she chose other prey." His eyes fixed on mine. "The boy you're trying to save, what's he to you?" I thought about Ryan's easy smile, his enthusiasm for his geology studies, the way he'd been so polite when I'd found him off the trail. A stranger, really, someone I'd known for all of 10 minutes before the nightmare began. But I also thought about his parents, who would be waiting for a phone call that wouldn't come. About the kind of ranger I wanted to be, the kind of man I wanted Emma to remember when she grew up. "He's my responsibility," I said finally. Tommy nodded like that was the answer he'd expected. "Then you know what you have to do. There has to be another way. Some kind of weapon, some ritual to banish her, something." "The Catholic Church sent an exorcist in 1887, Tommy said. They found his body 3 days later, hanging from a tree branch by his own entrails. The Army sent a platoon of soldiers in 1923. They never found their bodies at all. The FBI sent a task force in 1967. 2 agents came back, both in psychiatric hospitals for the rest of their lives." He stood up and walked to the porch railing, looking out at the mountains where the witch waited. "The old powers don't die, Ben. They just sleep. And when they wake up hungry, somebody has to pay the price." What about my family? She threatened them. The marks will protect them. Once you bear the shadow, she'll have no interest in your wife and daughter. They'll live normal lives, never knowing what you sacrificed for them. I sat there as the sun climbed higher, feeling the infection spread through my circulatory system like liquid darkness. In a few hours, the other rangers would realize I'd gone AWOL from the search operation. They'd start looking for me, and eventually they'd find evidence of my last known location. Maybe one of them would find Ryan's remains, eventually. Maybe they'd write it off as an animal attack or a fall from a cliff. Maybe his parents would have closure. Or maybe the witch would claim another victim from among the searchers, and another ranger would face the same impossible choice I was facing now. I stood up, my legs screaming in protest, and shook Tommy's hand. Thank you for telling me the truth. There's one more thing, he said. The bargain has to be made at the place of power during the hour of the blood moon, and it has to be your choice, made freely and without coercion. If she forces or tricks you into it, the deal won't hold. What do you mean? I mean you have to walk into that shadow realm tonight, knowing exactly what you're agreeing to, and offer yourself in the boy's place. No lies, no mental reservations, no secret plans to escape later. She'll know if you're not sincere. I nodded and turned to walk back to my truck. Behind me, Tommy called out one last piece of advice. Tell your family you love them, Ben, while you still remember what love feels like. The drive back to the cabin took forever and no time at all. I wanted to see Sarah and Emma again, to hold them and memorize their voices, and the way they smelled, and the sound of their laughter. But I also dreaded having to lie to them, to pretend everything was normal when I was about to walk away from them forever. They were having lunch when I walked through the door. Grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, Emma's favorite. Sarah took one look at my face and sent Emma to her room to play. Ben, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah, I said, pulling her into my arms and holding her as tightly as I could. I need you to take Emma and drive to your mother's house in Albany. Today. Right now. What? Why? Ben, you're scaring me. I buried my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the warmth of her skin. There's something happening in the forest, something dangerous. I can't explain it all, but I need to know you and Emma are safe. Is this about that missing hiker? Ben, you're just one ranger. This isn't all your responsibility. Yes, it is, I whispered. It is my responsibility, and I'm going to handle it. But I need you away from here when I do. She pulled back to look at me, and I saw her notice the dark veins that had crept up my neck despite my efforts to hide them with a high collar. Jesus, Ben, what happened to you? We need to get you to a hospital. No hospitals, just promise me you'll take Emma and go. Please, trust me on this. It took 2 hours of arguing, pleading, and finally half-truths about a dangerous fugitive hiding in the park before Sarah finally agreed to pack a bag. I helped them load the car, kissed them both goodbye, with a desperation that made Emma look at me with confused concern. Daddy, when are you coming to Grandma's? She asked as I buckled her into her car seat. Soon, sweetheart, I lied. I'll be there soon. Sarah drove away at 4:30 p.m., and I watched their taillights disappear around the mountain curve with the knowledge that I'd never see them again. At least not as the man they knew. The blood moon would reach its peak at 11:47 p.m. I had 7 hours and 17 minutes to live as Ben Sawyer, husband and father and rookie forest ranger who still believed the world made sense. I spent those hours writing letters, one to Sarah, explaining as much as I could without sounding completely insane. I told her I loved her, that this wasn't her fault, that she should remarry someone who could give Emma the father she deserved. I left her the life insurance information and the deed to the cabin, one to Emma for her to read when she was older. I told her how proud I was of her, how much light she'd brought into my life, how I hoped she'd grow up strong and brave and kind. I told her to remember her daddy as someone who'd tried to do the right thing, even when it was hard. And one to my supervisor reporting the location of Ryan's body and recommending that Blackwater Ridge be permanently closed to public access. I didn't expect him to take that recommendation, but maybe it would plant a seed of caution. At 11 p.m., I drove back to the coordinates where this nightmare had begun. The blood moon hung fat and red in the sky, casting everything in shades of copper and shadow. I parked the truck and walked the last quarter mile on foot, my infected legs barely able to carry me. The witch was waiting. She stood in the clearing beside the blackened oak tree, no longer bothering to hide her true nature. The shadow realm and the real world had merged in this place during this hour, and I could see her as clearly as if she were made of flesh and blood. Ryan hung suspended 20 feet away, wrapped in shadows that pulsed like a heartbeat. He was conscious but weak, his face pale with blood loss. When he saw me, hope flickered in his eyes. "You came," the witch said, and her voice was like silk over steel. "I wondered if you would. Human courage is such a fragile thing. I'm here to make a deal," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Let Ryan go. Take me instead." "Ah, but it's not that simple, young ranger. I don't merely need a body for the ritual. I need willing sacrifice. Someone who chooses to feed my power of their own free will. Are you prepared to make that choice?" I looked at Ryan, thinking about his parents waiting for him to come home. I thought about all the other hikers who would wander these trails in years to come. All the families who would never know what happened to their loved ones if the witch continued to hunt unchecked. And I thought about Sarah and Emma, safe in Albany, never knowing that their husband and father had become something monstrous to protect a stranger. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" The witch smiled, revealing those needle-sharp teeth. "Kneel before me. Accept my mark willingly. Serve as my eyes and ears and hands in the world of men. Guide the lost to my realm when the hunger takes me. In exchange, the boy goes free, and your family remains under my protection forever." And I become like that thing that wore Ryan's face yesterday? Not immediately. The change takes time. Years. Perhaps decades. You'll retain much of yourself at first, enough to be effective in your new role. But eventually, yes, you'll become something more than human, and less than alive. I closed my eyes and made my choice. I accept. The words seemed to echo in the air long after I'd spoken them. When I opened my eyes, the witch was standing directly in front of me, so close I could smell the grave earth scent of her breath. "You understand," she whispered, "that there is no going back, no changing your mind, no rescue, no clever trick that will free you from this bargain?" "I understand. And you choose this fate willingly, of your own free will, with full knowledge of the consequences?" "I do." She placed her hand on my forehead, and the cold that shot through my skull made the shadow infection in my legs feel like a warm summer breeze. I felt something fundamental shift inside my brain, like gears clicking into a new configuration. When she pulled her hand away, I could see things I'd never seen before. The forest was full of spirits, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all the people who died in these mountains over the centuries. They watched our transaction with hollow eyes, understanding that another soul had just joined their ranks. "It is done," the witch said. "Rise, my servant." I stood up, and I could feel the change already beginning. My damaged feet no longer hurt, and when I looked down, I saw the shadow veins had spread throughout my entire body, visible beneath skin that was already beginning to take on a grayish tint. Ryan dropped from his shadowy bonds, hitting the ground hard but alive. He looked up at me with terror and gratitude warring in his expression. "Run," I told him, my voice already sounding different to my own ears. "Run home and never come back to these mountains." He stumbled to his feet and crashed through the underbrush, heading for the main trail. I listened to his footsteps fade into the distance, knowing he'd live to see another sunrise, knowing his parents would hold him again. It was worth it. Whatever I'd become, whatever I would become, it was worth it. The witch watched Ryan disappear into the forest with the satisfied expression of a predator who'd just finished a particularly satisfying meal. Then she turned back to me. "Your first task begins now," she said. "There are others who know too much about me. The old Indian, for one. He's been carrying my mark for 70 years, and I grow tired of his existence. You will visit him tomorrow night and ensure his silence. permanently. The rational part of my mind, the part that was still Ben Sawyer, husband and father and protector of the innocent, recoiled in horror. But underneath that revulsion, something new was stirring, something that whispered how satisfying it would be to feel Tommy's neck snap between my hands. Yes, I heard myself say, I understand. And God help me, I did understand. More than that, I was already beginning to want it. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying Ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror. And comment your theory about what really happened to Ryan Michael Davis. I read every single one. The story you've just read is a work of fiction. But sometimes when the wind blows just right through the mountains of western New York, hikers report seeing a figure in a forest ranger uniform walking the trails at night. They say his skin has a grayish tint and his eyes are filled with shadows. They say he's always willing to help lost travelers find their way somewhere. If you ever meet Ranger Ben Sawyer on a lonely mountain trail, just remember, he's only doing his job.